Hello all, Woodwork Geek here. Today I've got a video showing you building probably my most complex board to date. It is a Ukrainian mixed with Union Jack. This was a special commission for late 2022 for Christmas. I did a number of different designs for the board before settling on this particular design and confirmed with the client this is the one that they wanted. In order to build the board, there are many different types of wood required to give the different colours. So you've got blue, yellow, white and red used in the Ukrainian and UK boards. So the first job was to mill a load of lumber down so that I could then make planks to cut the individual colours from. Here you can see me having planed the wood down. I'm using the table saw to cut each piece to width, ready to then glue up into the various different planks. I had to do this for all of the different types, so there was quite a lot of planing and thicknessing needed to get all of the timber ready, as well as a lot of kind of cutting the various different pieces to width, which is what you can see me doing here. Here you can see me using the drum sander. I sometimes use the drum sander just to get a tight glue line. So the drum sander, it kind of excels at getting perfect thickness pieces of wood through and leaving a nice clean kind of joint line. So I spent quite a lot of time going through the cycle between the planer, the thicknesser, the table saw and the jointer, and then the drum sander in order to get the wood all ready and kind of PAR ready for glue ups into planks. The key with all kind of boards really for end grain is making sure that the wood is in the right state before you commence. If you shortcut any of the planing, thicknessing, jointing, sanding kind of stages, you'll end up with an imperfect glue joint, and this is typically where you'll get problems further down the line with either the joints not tightening up or angles not being square, and at that point you're kind of chasing your tail. So this step here for me is really one of the most important kind of steps in order to make sure that the finished product comes out exactly as needed. And you can see I'm just going through different types. There's some sapele going through just to tidy that up, a little bit of ash there too. Just cleaning up all the wood so that I've got a uniform thickness for each piece of wood, so that when I glue them into planks, they're a uniform kind of thickness and just makes it a lot easier to glue things together. All in all, I used quite a few planks for this, which is why you can see so much time being spent on the planing. I think it was 3 of the ash planks, 2 of the dark iroko, 1 light iroko, and then there was 2 blocks of the sapele that ended up making the 3 boards. As you can see there's quite a stack of lumber that goes through the planer to get it to its required kind of dimensions, just to make sure that everything's perfect. I ended up having to sharpen my blades halfway through this to keep on top of it, so it was quite an undertaking, and certainly much more work than many of the boards that I've made to date. Here you can see me just gluing up some of the planks. So there was many planks used. I think I glued up too many in the end. I had 2 or 3 planks left over, but always better to machine too much at the beginning rather than not quite enough. The first plank was iroko. This here again is the iroko. This is going to be used for the yellow segments. The first part will be the blue segment, so the top of the Ukrainian flag, as well as the blue triangles for the UK Union Jack elements of the flag. As with everything, this section is really important in terms of making sure you get good contact points between each of the boards, and that the jointing of each of those boards is such that when you glue them together you get a nice tight fit. Once the glue's dried, it's then a case of scraping the glue joints down, cleaning them up so that they're ready to go through. I think I put them through the drum sander, just to again make sure that everything's clean and tidy, and all the surfaces are as expected. There were a couple of the boards where I had to get precise thicknesses. So with the UK flag, you need 2 centimetre strips of white, 1 centimetre strips of white, and 3 centimetre strips of white. The 1 and the 3 are used for the corners, and the 2 centimetre strips of white are used either side of the red stripe as part of the Union Jack. So it's absolutely critical to get those kind of diameters or distant widths correct. For each of my glue ups, I tend to leave them overnight, so I'll machine in the evening, get the timbers jointed up, and then I typically will not unclamp them until the following day, just to make sure that that glue's got enough time to really bond those pieces together. That's just the way that I do it. I know sometimes you can leave it a little bit less time than that, but I prefer to be over cautious rather than under. Here you can see possibly the most important thing in the workshop, a cup of tea. Here we've got some of the last bits of the iroko being glued up and just getting ready for the sapele for the red stripes. So these were just a fraction under 3 centimeters or 30mm squares of sapele that I had. This will come back to bite me a little bit later in the video, as when I have them glued up and finished sanded, they come in underneath the required 6 centimeter width that I need for the red stripe, which in hindsight was a mistake at this stage. All of the sapele used in these boards was reclaimed, so I was lucky enough to get my hand on a number of window frames that were sapele that were used in a listed building. They'd ripped those windows out to put new oak frame windows in, and I managed to get hold of these sapele pieces, which in the end turned out absolutely magnificent, even if they were a little bit thinner than needed. Here you can see I'm just changing the sanding paper on the Supermax. This tool is just one of my favourite tools. It made such a difference to the boards that I build, just increasing the quality of the glue joints and saving so much time in terms of getting to finish sanding. I used to plane with a router sled all my boards flat, and then have to go with a random orbit sander or Rotax sander to get them to a finished state from there, and it used to take me forever to sand out the marks left by planing. But this Supermax drum sander is absolute dream. I typically use 120 grit in this machine all the time now. Sometimes I go up to 180 if I've got a bigger batch of boards to just lessen that first sand on the Rotax, but it is just a workhorse and an invaluable tool that I don't think I could live without anymore. Here I am just preparing the cross-cut sledge for taking the planks down to, in essence, end grain blocks. Loads of blocks were needed for these boards. So I don't think I recorded all of the footage cutting each of those blocks. But in essence, the key thing to remember when cutting these blocks is to keep the boards in order, so that, as you can see here, when you flip them, you get a lovely grain pattern coming through, so that you alternate that grain pattern to try and keep the tension in the wood in check, so that you don't have all the grain patterns going in the same direction trying to break the board apart. So you can see me doing it with the ash, the sapele and the iroko pieces here. Here I'm using the bandsaw to cut down some of the ash strips so that I can get the right thickness for the various 3 centimetre and 1 centimetre pieces needed to make the Union Jack segments for the board. This was quite a key kind of part to get right, because the measurements for the Union Jack are really specific. So again, here you can see me cutting down the sapele parts to get the 2 centimetre segments for the red stripes for the Union Jack. All of these measurements are really critical, so I tend to overcut them on the bandsaw, and then I'll use the drum sander, as you can see, to then bring them down to final dimension, so that I know that I've got a very clean flat surface to then use to glue up. Here I am again with the drum sander, just flattening down the pieces to make sure everything's at its right kind of dimension. I spent a lot longer than normal on these boards in terms of machining lumber, from sawn timber down to par, down to thickness to the correct widths and kind of lengths, in order to make these boards, and it was quite a underestimate from my perspective in terms of how much time goes into a Union Jack board compared to a other design that I've done in terms of boards. I must have spent 3 times the normal amount of time making these particular boards. I don't regret it for a second. These boards came out fantastic. You get out what you put in, and I'm very happy with the results. So all good, just I know for next time these boards are a undertaking in terms of machining, gluing and joining. Here you can see I'm just moving into the glue up of the Union Jack. So you can see the iroko on the left, ash, sapele, ash, iroko that are joined together. Those shapes will in effect then make up the corners for the Union Jack. The angles are really critical, so what I was trying to do by kind of gluing them up in this section was to avoid as much wastage as possible. I'm not sure I managed it in hindsight. I think if I was to make more Union Jack boards, I'd probably draw out on scale paper the wastage that you would get from different blocks to work out the right or least wastage option to get to make these boards, because it was, yeah, I have loads of triangle shaped pieces of offcuts now that I'll need to kind of glue up into many blocks to make a chaos board at some point, because that's far too much wastage to let go. Here I'm cutting up the yellow part of the Ukrainian flag, so I'm just cutting each block to the thickness of the board. So all my boards I tend to make about 55 millimeters at this stage. That gives me about 5 millimeters of play to run through the flattening jig and then through the drum sander to get finished edges, so that you end up with a board that's 5 centimeters or just over in terms of thickness, which will avoid cupping. So that's nearly kind of 2 inches if you're used to Imperial. Here you can see the Union Jack corners have dried, so I'm taking them out and I'm just running them through the flattening jig to level off one surface so that I can then get them cut into their kind of rectangle shapes for the corners. So as part of glue up, I found this method was a little bit tricky in terms of it didn't leave each of the joints perfectly flat that I tend to get on some of the other boards. So it's definitely something I would improve for the next one. Here you can see I'm flattening the kind of iroko or lighter iroko kind of wood that will be the yellow for the Ukrainian, and again just flattening one side, and there's the darker iroko for the Ukrainian flag. Quite strange how one species of wood I managed to get both light and dark shades for the Ukrainian flag. An unusual characteristic of the iroko wood. Here I am cutting the kind of blocks for the rectangles for the Ukrainian flag. So those corner dimensions are about 10 centimeters by 20 centimeters. So that's 10 centimeters by 20 centimeter blocks of the two different colors. And here you can see me gluing them up to make the different corner pieces. So two corners per board, 3 boards, 6 in total. Here I'm drum sanding the kind of Union Jack flags to get them flat and get the kind of planing marks out of them. And another cup of tea. Can't go wrong with a cup of tea. Here you can see me trying to work out the angles. So I started with a ruler and a kind of framing square to get the corners, but it didn't work out. So I ended up moving on to the template that you quickly saw there. So the template jig I found was invaluable. So that for me was one of the biggest kind of learns on this. It has the angles, which is 30.9 degrees, and sorts that out. Here you can see I've made a mistake. So when I did the glue up for this Union Jack board, I didn't glue enough iroko, so I had some gaps. So here I am kind of fixing my mistakes and gluing in little offcuts of iroko to make up that full square so that it is as it should be. One thing with woodwork I tend to find is that you're always learning. Here I'm cutting the corner to rough dimension, so I'm just trimming those bits off with the bandsaw so you can see the wastage parts as I'm cutting those off. I do this with all of the corners. I think it was 6 in total, and then I took them, so I overcut on the bandsaw, and then I take them to the disc sander, and then I use the disc sander to trim them back to kind of final dimension. I think in hindsight I'm not sure this was the best method. I'd probably use the miter saw to get the correct dimensions, because here you can see that I was having to re-straighten the disc sander because it wasn't quite parallel to the surface. So I wasn't overly happy with this stage, and I'd certainly improve it for the next one by trimming most of the material away using the bandsaw and then just using the miter saw. Here I am back at the drum sander, just flattening off the red centre stripes for the boards. In hindsight, I could have done with a bit more sapele. I cut this a little bit too fine, so as well as them being too thin, I was half a strip short, so it took a little bit of playing. Here's a kind of valuable kind of step. I did this for every block really. So after I've dimensioned the blocks on the cross-cut sledge, I then knock off the furry edges with a bit of sandpaper just to flatten them up. This was my preferred way for the corner blocks, so the miter saw was so much more accurate. I wish I'd have done this first time round. but the joy of learning. Here you can see me just putting the long length through the table saw just to make sure all of those lines are parallel, so that when they're glued up everything fits together as it should do. Here you can see me just doing a dry fit. So this is where I pull the boards together. So there's the dry fit, and now I just glue them in. This worked okay. I think in hindsight, having the thin strips in the sapele is a nice focal point, but I wish I'd done single blocks for the sapele. In reality, it would have been a lot simpler glue up. I think if I made this style of board again, I would also glue it in two halves rather than try and get all four segments or four corners of the board in one go. Doing two halves together, clamping it, and then doing the other two halves to it, I think you'd get a cleaner and more even clamping pressure across it than I was able to in the clamping jig. Here I am just squaring off the edges of the board. So this is all glued up. It's had 24 hours. You can see me running the three different boards through the table saw just to clean up those edges. Here's the parallel cuts to make sure the board's the right width. The key you're trying to do here is making sure that the red corner segments of the board fall in the actual corner. Here I am just trimming the handles onto the boards, so you can see I use a jig to make sure the handles all come out exactly the same. So it's just a little handheld router with a straight flute on there that I cut the handles to about 15mm depth. Nice, quick and easy, just a bit messy, creates a big pile of sawdust on the floor. Yeah, not much more, bit of sanding. It's a Festool RTS 400. It's a new addition to the workshop. It's a great little sander for the handles. I don't like it for the surfaces. I find the oscillation pattern is not as good at getting a finished surface as the Rotax sander is, so I tend to use the RTS 400 for the handles and edges, and then use the Rotax RO150 for the flat surfaces. Here I am just beveling the corners, or was beveling the corners, so I put a 45-degree chamfer on all of them, and again I use the RTS 400 to do those. Sanding for these boards is quite an undertaking. Here it looks quite quick, and you can see it's kind of sped up quite massively. I put hours into sanding these boards, so they did go through the drum sander. I didn't capture the footage of them, but they went through the drum sander to start with to get the boards up to 120 grit. Then with the Rotax, I do 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, 320. I then moved to mesh, and I did 400, 500, 600, 1000 on them. So they have more sanding than you can poke a stick at. Always trying to use the same grid pattern that you can see me doing here. But in essence, you get out of sanding what you put in. As long as you put the effort in and go through the grits, you'll end up with a fantastic looking board with a nice shine to it, and it really is kind of worth that effort. It just is a labour of love. When sanding, I tend to water pot the last 2-3 grits, so I'll kind of spray or wipe the boards with water and then let it dry fully before sanding off the last couple of grits. That ensures that when I do this stage, the oiling of the board, it stays glassy smooth and not rough to touch. So I tend to use Osmo on all my boards, unless special requests not to. This is me applying the Osmo's extra thin. So I use this for the first 2 coats on these boards to really let that oil soak into the board, to get the kind of protection and make the grain and colours pop of the wood. And then I use Osmo's top oil, the butcher block oil. I just have great results with it. I really can't complain. Here I am using the jig to put all the feet on. So 4 feet per board, and they're done. Here we've got some shots of the boards in a finished state. So these are 4 oils, 2 extra thin, 2 top oil, and done, finished prior to handing over to the new owner. So as you can see, the boards have come out better than I could have ever imagined, to be honest. They really are a high quality board, and very, very distinctive. I really am super pleased with how these boards came out. Hopefully you like these boards and you enjoyed watching this video. If you've made it till now, well done. 26 minutes of board watching and listening to me rattle on. You deserve a medal. Thank you very much. See you soon.